Claire. Before I introduce our panel, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the nature of the finance industry and also the state of diversity in it. Because I think when people think about a career in finance, lots of us might think about trading floors in an investment bank, people with lots of screens and multiple phones and all that kind of thing. But even within investment banking, there are people who are doing research, people help advising companies on mergers and acquisitions or listing on a stock exchange. And beyond investment banks, you've obviously got retail banks, you've got insurance companies, and you've got the asset management industry. So, and Paola's going to talk a little bit about that. The industry where people are building portfolios, putting together portfolios for either retail customers or institutional investors like pension funds or charities or insurance companies and so on. So there's a huge range of different careers in finance. My background was I was an investment consultant for many years, advising large pension funds on how they should invest their money. And there are lots of other specialist consulting, legal, IT organizations that support the finance industry as well. And of course, every finance company, financial organization needs HR people, IT people, sales, marketing, etc. So there's a lot of breadth in the types of roles that people can play, even within the finance industry. And it's worth remembering that it represents something like 7% of total economic output in the UK and employs over 1 million people. So it's a big sector. Now, I think it's fair to say that many of the parts of the industry have been quite male-dominated. The Diversity Project is an organisation which is trying to create a more inclusive industry in the investment world. And we did a survey of our asset management firm members a few years ago, and about 4,000 people took part across 24 firms. And we found that over 80% of investment roles were taken by men. And we also know from other studies that it's only around 14% of portfolio managers, people like Paola, are women. But that's really starting to change. The industry recognises the needs to have more diversity in its teams. The regulators are asking more questions, and the clients are also wanting to see more diversity in the teams that are running money for them. And we know that people like you also care a lot about the kind of culture of the organisations that you're considering, and you want to work for organisations that are inclusive. So firms are doing a lot to try and address that lack of diversity. So this evening we've got two great panellists here. So Paola Binns, who read Modern History and Modern Languages, matriculated in 1980, is a fund manager at Royal London. Previously worked at Credit Suisse, but we were just discussing you actually started out in investment banking, which is quite a common route into the fund management industry. And she's joined by Rebecca Emerson, who studied economics back in 1992, and is a partner at Oliver Wyman, which is a specialist consultant, and you're going to explain it more, but a specialist management consulting firm that advises a lot of different financial institutions. So I'd like to hand over at this point to Elizabeth, who's going to chair the panel piece of this session.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Claire, for your welcome. So we'll start with a few general questions to get to know Paola and Rebecca a bit better, and then we will open up to questions here in the audience and online as well. So I'll start with you, Paola, if I may. Tell us a bit about what you do and your day job.
Okay, I work at Royal London. I manage fixed income bond portfolios. I'm actually the head of 8 fund managers at Royal London. I've just recently been promoted. And actually I'm getting more reports as we speak. So the department is expanding. So just to give you an idea of what I do on a day-to-day basis, we're managing about 40 billion within the people that I work with. I personally manage about 14 billion pounds worth of money. My clients are people like BP or the Environment Agency, In fact, the Environment Agency have amalgamated with other local authorities. So it's one of the biggest funds that we manage. It's about $2.5 billion. It's the Brunel project. I manage money for them. So I've been doing that for about 13 years. And as I said, only recently been promoted. The fund managers are predominantly men. And so I am a kind of an outlier there. We have one other fund manager at Royal London who works in the property department. And they are, I often get grilled by clients about why we don't have more women, which is sort of a bit ironic because, I am a woman. And, but we do have actually quite a diverse team, the team that I work with. And I think that really helps the success of the team. And so we do have a, very good track record, which is why we've won these mandates, and they're quite large mandates for significant pension schemes and quite high-profile clients. And so every day I come in, and just to give you an idea of what I do, I look at screens, I look at markets. I mean, today the gilt market went crazy, and it's an interesting job because even if you think that I've been working for almost 40 years, and you think I've seen everything, but you're only, I always say to my recruits when they come in, you're only as good as your last trade. So just because you made money yesterday doesn't mean that you've got to make, it's about, having a process and making money over time, and a sustainable kind of form of investment is really important. And, you never really, dominate markets in a way, things always take you by surprise. I mean, what happened today in the gilt market went shooting up because yesterday's budget, they said they weren't going to, there's going to be 60 billion less of issuance in the gilt market. So, we had a 40-point, which is almost like a 20% rise in the price of the very long-dated gilts. This may mean nothing to you, but it was like extremely volatile and took most of the investors by surprise. So, most days aren't like this, like today, but it's a very interesting job. It's never the same, but pretty much I'm coming in, looking at screens and trading. And that's pretty much what I do.
Thank you, Paola, and congratulations on the promotion.
Oh, thank you.
Rebecca, same question to you. Tell us a little bit about your day-to-day and what your job involves.
Okay. So I'm a partner at Oliver Wyman, and I focus on financial services. So we're a consultancy. In my part of the business, we advise mainly banks, but sometimes the regulators of banks, and sometimes the stock exchanges and asset managers also. Like Paola, though, I stare at screens all day, but that's because it's still, everything's done virtual, or almost everything for me. But at any one time, I'll be working on a portfolio of projects, and at the same time, I'll be talking to clients about potential new projects to do. So just to give you a flavor, I've got one project that's for, actually at the moment, all my projects are for big banks. One of them is looking at the technology system and working with a group of colleagues and the client itself to think about how should that technology platform look like 3 years down the line. And how do you get from today's not very good technology to the technology that they need to have, and working with the users to understand what's needed. So that's one project. And another one, for example, is looking at the risk department of one of the very large banks in the city. And they're asking if they've got enough people or if they have too many in the right place and the right seniority. So we're looking at the organization of the risk function. And another project is looking at the supporting for some remediation, so fixing problems that the regulator has cited. And unfortunately, I'm sure my colleagues will here on the panel will laugh, but the regulator can bug you as a bank or as an asset manager for quite a while. So I think that one has legs. And then today I had a conversation with a treasurer of a large bank out in the Middle East. He wanted some help on potentially a new project. And so we discussed what that project could look like. And yesterday I talked to a treasurer on the continent about, again, how we might be able to help him. So it's a combination of things. And at the same time, it's evaluation season for us. So writing evaluation of the consultants that work for me, and also getting evaluated myself. So it's always different things to do depending on the day and the season.
Thank you, Rebecca. Back to you, Paola. Jane mentioned that you started in a different type of firm to where you are now. Tell us a little bit about your career journey and how you ended up where you are today.
I started in investment banking, so there was a milk round, and the banks would come around and take you out for dinner and then offer you jobs. And so I got a job with First Chicago, which I think is now, in fact, if I look at my old jobs, none of the jobs at the banks that I work for exist anymore. They're all amalgamated into other banks. So I think First Chicago is part of JP Morgan now. So it probably sounds great if I put JP Morgan on my CV. But so they had an internship and they trained you up. And then they moved you around various departments at First Chicago. And I ended up in the trading department. And then I moved to another company called Kidder Peabody, which actually went bankrupt. We had, I was there for a few years, about 7 years actually. I was trading. So it was, it's surprising, but I think I was the only female trader at the time. You'd go into these morning meetings, and we'd be surrounded by men, and just me. And it was quite an exciting job, with high pressure. It was difficult when I had children actually to do trading, and because you're worried about your positions. Things happen, news breaks out overnight. You think, oh my God, you're going to lose so much money. So that was kind of stressful. And Kidder Peabody went bankrupt because we had a case of fraud actually, and we were bought by GE for $1. But I kept my job, and then GE sold it to Payne Webber. So this is all the time trading, and trading mainly government bonds actually. And then I realised when I was in my 30s, and I must have felt very old then, I was 35 or 30, I thought, this job, a trading job, is not a job for older people. They want young people. They're going to, get rid of me if I hang around here too long. So then I went into asset management, which is what I'm doing now, because it's a very different kind of business, because actually in the business I'm in now, they actually value experience. And, and your clients, even though they say they want things to change, they want the same person managing their money over a long period of time. So I have a relationship with some of my clients for over 10 years. So, for example, the Environment Agency has to see them every year, and they'd always give me a hard time, however well I'd done. It was one of those meetings where they'd always give me a hard time. But it was a relationship that you had, and they kind of want that, which actually is one of the reasons sometimes cited why the business doesn't change, because at the same time they want the same manager, but then they want more women. So you're gonna something's got to give. So I made the swap, and I did that with Credit Suisse. I took a step sideward in my career. I became what was, like a trader, not an investment manager that I am now. And then I waited for a couple of years, and I got the opportunity to get the job I wanted at Credit Suisse. And then I became an investment manager, which had more prestige. And then I got this job at Royal London. So it was a kind of convoluted way. And as I said, at one point, because I had children, I just thought I need to step back a bit. And one of the reasons I chose the job I did at Royal London is because it's very much UK focused. I wasn't, because it was, at Credit Suisse I had the option to go into emerging markets or do sterling. And I thought, if I do emerging markets, I'm going to have to be travelling all the time. And it's not going to be great with three, I have had 3 children travelling. So I chose sterling, which is very unglamorous. So my business trips are like Manchester or Rochdale, so I'm not going to kid you, you're going to go somewhere very fancy if you do the job I do, but it's still very interesting. Anyway, so I've 13 years is my last job at Royal London.
Thank you, Paola. Now, Rebecca, you did a DPhil at Queen's. Tell us about your journey from Queen's into consulting and where you are now.
Being a bit hesitant, a bit conservative in terms of career choices, I thought, well, I'll just keep doing the same thing. So I went and did a postdoc. But then I realized I didn't really have it for academia. So I moved on to something that was a halfway house to academia, which is called the Bank of England. So they take a lot of academic economists, and you do a bit of research, and it was a bit of applied. So did a bit of research on the gilt market, and they would then use that when in discussions about issuance. But at that point I thought, you can't really pay for a central London residence if you're working at the Bank of England. So I moved on, and like you, went on quite a journey. So I thought, okay, well, trading floor looks exciting. There's a lot more movement than you would get at the Bank of England, for example, a lot more energy. So I went to what was then called BZW, which doesn't exist anymore. And while I was there, it turned into Barclays Capital, which is what most of you will have heard of. And I actually sat on the trading floor, but I worked in what was called risk management. So with a very technical degree from Oxford, they thought that was great. I could then use it to really understand about how some of the financial instruments worked and how the risk would work, so how much money you could lose if things were to go wrong in your investments or in your buying and your selling. So I did that. Then I went to NatWest. Everyone still hears of that. And then I left when it got bought by a Scottish bank, and tried consulting for the first time. And did lots of traveling. It's not conducive to family life, I'll tell you that right now. Zoom's been really good if you're a consultant. You can just sit in front of your computer screen. But from there I went actually into investment management, but on the strategy side. So did business strategy at Invesco Perpetual. So it's one of the UK fund managers, runs both retail as well as institutional money. So got to commute between London and Hindley, that great financial center in Oxfordshire. And then after that, decided I'd try consulting again. And now I've been at Oliver Wyman another 15, 16 years. I've lost track. Mm-hmm. But yeah, quite a different journey.
Great, thank you. Now, Paola, what advice would you give to anyone here or online who's interested in a career in your area of finance?
Well, I think if you're a female, this is a great time to apply because the asset managers are desperate to get more women joining. And it's always a problem encouraging women to come into the business. We're not sure exactly why. There are lots of internships across the city. We offer one at Royal London, but you pretty much, I think, every large asset manager or every large bank will offer you an internship. And some of them are very competitive and quite hard to get on, but I wouldn't be put off because I would just try, whatever, internship you can get into. That would be really helpful, I think, for your career. And almost, as you were saying earlier, there are lots of different types of jobs within asset management or even banking. It's not just investment management. You could do marketing, or, there are lots of different routes in. And I took a step back at one point and did more kind of, an operational job at Credit Suisse, for example, to get the job that I actually wanted. So being strategic and thinking longer term and being in the right place or the right institution can be quite helpful. So you might end up taking a job that you might not want, but there's a route maybe to the job that you do want. In fact, I've got a lady working for me at the moment, and she started off in accounting. She's from Poland, and she came over here. She's quite a go-getter, and she's now working on my desk. And so the idea would be that I give her a bit of time, train her up, and she would then be get an investment job, possibly if we rate her highly enough. But so there are routes in, and she started off in a job that's quite hard and a bit boring, but she's going in the right direction, and she's going to have the job that I think that she wants in the end. But it just takes a bit of time. So I think just thinking a bit laterally sometimes. And I have 2 daughters, and trying to tell them that was quite difficult. So they just want the job they want. But there are different routes that aren't always the direct route. So don't be put off and think it has to be this or nothing else, or that if you're a lot of women that we're not good enough, or the spec doesn't exactly match what I think my skills are. I tell you what, it doesn't worry the men, so it shouldn't worry you.
Thank you, Paola. And I would recommend an internship as well, just to notch up some experience, but to open your eyes about things you might want to do, but also things you don't want to do. It's definitely something good for the CV and gives you something to talk about in your further interviews. So Rebecca, what advice would you give about the road into consulting for financial services?
Well, I would echo Paula's advice of effectively being flexible. But I would say you also need to be prepared to take risks, because I don't think when I was sitting in your seat, I had any idea like the kind of jobs that were out there, the breadth of jobs. And so sometimes when someone describes it to you and you're trying to imagine that, you might have to say, well, let me just try it. Let me just go for it and see what it's like. I think that's the best piece of advice right now is don't hesitate. And also when you look at the job spec, you don't have to tick all the boxes, okay? You just need to tick like 70% of them. And then you have to be courageous and just go for it. And it's often women don't do it. Women wait till they tick 100%, but please, let me encourage you just to go for it if you want that job.
Yeah, and a lot of job specs are copy-paste. They're not written with much thought behind them.
That is true.
So thank you both for your answers there. We will open it up to questions from the audience and online now. So if anyone would like to ask a question in the audience, please pop up your hand and Heather will come up to you with the microphone.
Paola, you used some terms, fixed income and gilt, spelled GILT, I guess. And and I think I wouldn't know what they meant with it.
No, sorry, but I try not to use jargon, but fixed income is just bonds, if you know what bonds are. So forms of financing. So rather than go to the bank, a large company might issue a bond, and then there would be lots of people that might own bits of that bond, which is effectively a large company borrowing capital in the market, or they want financing a large project, whatever it might be. Actually, sometimes just to pay dividends, so to pay shareholders money. Can you believe it? It's something that we don't like to do, which is lend money so they can just pay money back to shareholders. But normally, when a bond would be financing, as I said, a large infrastructure project or just ongoing capital just to keep a company kind of functioning. But that's basically what a bond is. It's everybody thinks when they think of investment manager, it's about equities, about shares, but actually the bond market is much bigger. But it's not as we always joke that we're always sort of a glass half empty kind of investor, because all you're wanting is what you earn, which is your coupon, so you'll get an interest rate, and then you get your capital back at the end of the life of that bond. So if you invest in a share, that if you get the right company, your share price can go up 10, 15 times, and you can make a lot of money. You're never going to make a lot of money out of bonds. You're just going to get that coupon. What you do have is the risk of losing your capital, so the less risk of losing the money that you've invested because the borrower doesn't pay you back. And that could be just because the business isn't doing well, or it could be fraud, like the company that I worked with, Kidder Peabody, where the company just goes, there's been a few big cases, famous ones like, Enron, for example, and Parmalat. They went bankrupt, and bondholders lost a lot of money in those instances. So those bonds, and gilts are just bonds issued by a government. And so how does the UK finance themselves? Well, they borrow money from us, the bondholders, the bond investors, pension funds.
Is it called gilt? It's gilt-edged.
Yes, I think, back in the day it was gilt-edged.
It's very, very sure and certain. You'll get your money back. Yes,
but it's still called the risk-free rate.
Yeah.
So whatever interest rate you get from a gilt is called the risk-free rate. Yeah. But I invest in, not in gilts. I manage corporate bond portfolios. So I invest in corporate bonds, so bonds issued by large corporations. It's a huge market. So all Shell will issue bonds. I'm just thinking BP issue bonds. Banks, issue a lot of bonds. Insurance companies, everybody issues bonds.
Thank you. You're giving me flashbacks to the Securities and Investments Institute's exams that many of you would have to take if you go into finance. We've got another question from the audience, I think.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to hear about your career paths. I was just wondering, I'm a third year and I study history. So kind of asking for anyone in the audience that doesn't do an economics or business related degree, is that essential when you're applying for jobs, or can you kind of learn on the job? And in terms of applications, is having a technical background something that will hold you back, for example?
Maybe I could start with that, because I think when I first started researching asset management firms back in the mid-80s, I would meet portfolio managers, people like Paola, who had studied history, modern languages, or hadn't been to university at all. But there seems to have been this trend that now, that, a lot of people, unless they've studied economics or finance or maths, they don't think this is an industry for them. But actually, we need people who have studied different subjects, because you bring something different, a different way of looking at things. So I would really encourage you to consider a career in this industry. You need some basic numeracy skills, but it's not high mathematics, is it?
No.
It's kind of arithmetic, really.
It's not high mathematics, and you have computer programmers who do everything for you. So I don't sit there calculating yields or anything like that. What returns I'm getting. Somebody does that for me. But there's one thing that you should know, that depending on which job you choose in asset management, is that you will be required to take professional exams. So that's something to be aware of. And there are 4 professional exams that you have to take doing my job. So the first one is the IMC, which one of my daughters took, actually, and she's not got a mathematical background. Very easy exam, although one of the guys in the office took it, and he made a real mountain out of a molehill out of that one. I took it when I was old, when I did my career change. It's not that hard. But then there is a harder one, which is called the CFA, and that is a 3-year. You can do it in 2 years, but that is a fairly intense exam that you have to take. And I think the first one's okay, but the second and third require a lot of work. So you just need to be aware of that, that there will be a lot of studying required to get past those exams. And I know that if you want to work in a bank, they will ask that of you, even if you're sales, and you actually to do a sales job in a bank, selling fixed income to me, for example, so bonds to me. I don't think you need to have a CFA qualification, but they will ask that of you. And to do my job, they will ask that of you. But I don't think you need to be a mathematician to pass it.
No, I think if you're comfortable, if you're basically numerate, and you're prepared to work hard, it shouldn't be a barrier.
But it's just something to be aware of. It's not like a free part. When I got what they call grandfathered in, which sounds a bit insulting, but it just meant that I had so much experience. I didn't have to actually take those exams, apart from the IMC, which I had to take, which I passed, and I hadn't taken the exam for about 20 years at that point. So it's not beyond and most people's capabilities.
And I can say, as the mathematician on the panel, I don't really use maths in an obvious sense, but perhaps what was instilled in me here was precision around communication and telling a story. I think that's what I took from my education most of all, and being accurate and evidence-based in the kind of materials that I have to present and the arguments that I have to make. Do we have any more questions in the audience? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time. I actually have 2 questions, but I am aware that there are some time constraints, so just feel free to answer either one. The first one is more substantive, and it has to do, since we're in the fixed income conversation, with all the inflation talk and the rate hikes that we saw a rate hike today from the ECB, and expecting more from the BOE, I guess, and the Fed in the next couple of months. I was just wondering constantly the past few months, how does this and the extended financial statements of the central banks now, after 2 years of a pandemic, change the landscape in the fixed income and maybe the risk management landscape in general? And my second question is a bit more generic and has to do with the diversity talk in finance. And we've seen a lot of events from big employers lately regarding diversity from a women's perspective, LGBT, racial. So for you, being from the inside, is it real in practice, or is it just talk and events? Thank you.
I take the second one, just because I can...
Maybe Rebecca, we start with you on the macro question.
On the macro question, oh no, I was going to hand that to Paola, since she's the one that invests in fixed income.
Well, yeah. I mean, I could talk about it. I mean, you've had 10 years of positive returns in fixed income because interest rates have just been going down, so that's good for fixed income. So that we are on this kind of inflection point. So these are the questions that my investors are asking me. They're saying, should we be invested in fixed income? Most of them have to be invested in fixed income because it's part of a balance, what they call a balanced portfolio. So you don't just put all your money in share prices, even if you're positive in share prices, because most of the time you'll need some income, because if you're running a pension scheme, some people will be retired and you'll have to supply them with cash. You've got to give them money. And so fixed income is quite good for this. So actually I've just done an investment conference. I had to record it with one of my colleagues about 2 days ago. It's quite funny because, you know, I kept saying, why are we doing this 2 weeks before the investment conference? Things are going to, you know, markets are really volatile. They keep changing. And it's exactly what happened, because there's kind of a battle, if you like, in the markets, the fixed income markets. Those who think that the inflation is transitory, that this is just a kind of an output from all the sort of bottlenecks and the pandemic, and it's more about demand and supply issues, not about fundamental change in inflation outlook. But then obviously it's in the press everywhere. People are looking at wage inflation, and wage inflation is always a big indicator of actually whether the inflation is sticky or not. So the more wage inflation you get, the worse it is for a bond manager. Anyway, so our solution is you buy bonds with the least sensitivity to moves in interest rates, and that just give you some kind of income. And that is the way you manage that. But you talk to some, you know, it's quite interesting. There's some real, you know, clever people working in the banks, and they give you lots of advice. Some of them are very bearish, and some of them are very bullish, and they're both of them very clever people. But you know, you've got two different completely different views, which what makes a market basically.
But I think what was brought home with yesterday's budget is the politics still has the ability to move markets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And on the question of is it all a sort of smoke and mirrors, you know, this sort of push for more diversity, I would say that a couple of data points. I mean, the diversity project, we now have 86 member firms in it. So they are organisations in the industry who are wanting to change the way they do things. So I think that's evidence that they're committed to this. And every 2 months we have an advisory council which is made up of chief executives of our member firms. And if they weren't interested, if this wasn't a strategic priority, I don't think they'd bother turning up for those meetings, but they do. So I think, I'm sure there's some organisations where it's not real, but my sense is that there's a real recognition that the industry needs to change. It needs to reflect society. It's missing out on some fantastic talent. So there's lots of really good business reasons to make the change. But I'm sure that, you know, you're right to be a little bit cynical about some of it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm certainly seeing that we have an incentive to have diverse candidate slates, because we want that diversity of thought. And I don't just mean gender, it can be all facets of diversity. But also we try and have diverse panels, so you wouldn't always be interviewed by the same looking type of person as well. And I think that does make it easier when you can see people who have different experiences and perhaps somebody who resonates more with you. So I'm hopeful that things can continue to improve. We've got a question coming in online. As an investment manager, we are very keen to increase diversity. When team members ask me to interview, I ask, what is her name? What advice would you give us to attract more female candidates?
Yes, this is something that we struggle with as well. With the internships, when we advertise, what we tend to find is that there are probably twice as many men as there are women responding to the adverts for internships. So, but what I said was we should actually do 50-50. So you just make the balance when we get the interns in more reflective of society and not of just the numbers that are applying. But it's interesting because we were looking for somebody to do an analyst role, and we found the same thing, that the company who put the candidates forward to us, so they do a screening process, so these are people with experience and they get screened by a third-party provider for us. And again, it was the same issue, that we had almost 3 times as many men women applying. So it's actually a real conundrum. I'm not sure that I actually know, other than that what I do try and do is that when we're looking at the team, that I will try and make it more as diverse. It's not to say that if you're a woman, you automatically get a job if I need a woman to join the team, because that's not a very good way to run a business. But you know, it's something that you make more of an effort with, trying to get the women in. I don't know how to explain it properly, but yeah, it is an issue. And maybe, I mean, I talked to our HR lady, and she said it's something to do with, you need to think about the language that you use when you put adverts in the paper. Because I think that a lot of the language they use in the business is kind of harsh, and maybe the qualifications they ask you, as long as your arm. So most people would read that and just think, oh, I can't meet half of the qualifications they require. And actually, it's maybe, as you were saying, it's only about 70% of the qualification, you know, those things that you have to tick off that you actually need. So it's a combination of factors, I think. Maybe softening the approach. I don't know if you've...
Yeah, you've got to strip off. So when you do the CV screening, you strip off the personal identifiers. You don't know the person's name or where they're from and what school they went to. You take all that away. So you're actually trying to look at what they've done in terms of qualifications or extracurriculars. And then when you interview them, it's also how you interview them. So if you're giving them, because we do case interviews, the case interviewers never see the CV. So they don't know if the person went to Oxford or Cambridge, or if they went down the road to a small university. So you're not supposed to know that when it isn't important. So it's also, what we find is to do things more like panel interviews help, where you've got a diverse group of interviewers that are interviewing the candidates to get the kind of a balance of questions and balance of thought, to your point earlier. I think there's quite a few things to do, but I think it's going to take a while to turn things around.
I think one of the questions I get asked by my female interns is, what are the policies for having a family? So, you know, how much time do you get off? Is it compatible with raising a family, working investment managers? I mean, that might be sort of thinking far ahead, but I do get asked that. And we do give a year maternity leave, and you get even a right in our place to your share of a bonus, which is very generous. So if that's something that you're worried about, well, I don't know if women do actually worry about, is this compatible with a family life, this career? Because if you're thinking about working in an investment bank, it is a pretty cutthroat environment. It's very male dominated, you know, it still is. I mean, it's much better actually in the banks in terms of numbers of men to women than it is in investment management. So, you know, I just wonder, maybe sometimes the women might think, gosh, you know, this isn't compatible with you know, my life plan, which is having children at some point. And in investment management, it's pretty good. In investment banks, I think it's a little bit tougher if you want to have a family.
I think we're maybe seeing a greater expectation for flexibility in all respects now, coming off the back of the pandemic, and people wanting to have some control, particularly in a technology focus of finance where I work, where we're having to compete with technology firms who do have very flexible policies, you know, unlimited holidays or working from any location. We're having to compete for talent with less traditional or niche firms as well. Do we have another question in the audience?
So I was quite interested to hear that you did a DPhil, because I'm currently doing a DPhil at the moment, and I was somewhat concerned that I was sort of pigeonholing myself into research, whereas I've sort of been more interested in finance. I'm doing materials. So I just was interested to hear what your sort of transition was from doing research into finance, and then also how the various firms look upon people who've chosen to do a DPhil.
I guess for me it was easier because my DPhil was in really financial economics, although it was technically an economics degree. So it was very easy for me to transition from the subject, because I was using, dare I say it, option pricing theory to price new instruments. So it's the sort of thing that banks love. But generally I would say that, at least, so in consulting we hire a lot of DPhils, so my company does, and I'm pretty sure that the banks I advise, they hire lots of DPhils and doctorates, especially in something like materials, You're going to be very mathematical, and you're going to be able to understand things like derivative models. So I would say your skills will be in high demand. You'll just have to apply. Watch out for the milk run. I think it's just happened. I know our applications closed at the end of last week, but some of the banks might still be looking. Right now it's a hot market for talent in the city, in all levels. So they're looking, and they're looking for diverse talent. So I think you mentioned that earlier too. It's a good time to apply.
So I work for the Indian government. I do have a background in math, but lately because of my work, I'm in a generalist role. I was interested in infrastructure finance. So do any of you have any thoughts on that? Or in general for women working in government and interested in finance? Any advice, any thoughts?
On government, infrastructure finance. We do some investments in infrastructure finance on the pensions side. I just think, I don't really have any specific advice other than sort of general advice I'd give to anybody. Just try and get exposure as much as you can to the areas that you're interested in. That's the only advice that I could give you. I wouldn't be put off by anything in particular. Just if you've got a specific, goal, that's pretty good, because most people don't even know what they want to do when they leave university. So you're a step ahead of most people already.
Thank you. So we're running out of time on the online section, so thank you to everyone who's joined online. We can perhaps welcome a few more questions here, but just a few words around networking for those of you that will be staying here. We do invite you to join us in the foyer next door for some drinks and networking discussions. We haven't been networking for quite some time now face-to-face because of the COVID situation, and some of you may be quite new to it. So we appreciate it can feel daunting, but please don't be overwhelmed. Everyone is new to networking at some point, and it does get easier. Some tips could be around asking open-ended questions, approaching a friendly-looking group, and asking people a lot of questions about themselves, because people do love to talk about themselves. So don't be afraid of that. And once you start to build those connections and find some random things in common, you start to get that rapport going, and it becomes a lot easier. And we do have a LinkedIn group for the Queen's Women's Network that we have started. So we do encourage you to join that. It's not just for women, it's open to everyone. So we will make sure that details of that are circulated after this event as well, so that you can sign up and really grow our community and have that online engagement as well. We all look forward to supporting each other as we move forwards. Thank you very much.